right, welcome to Win-Loss Week 2021. And I'm joined by Kyle Jepson. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. But today we're talking about loss rate. I know it's win-loss week, and we're probably not focused on the losses, but I think if we take a closer look at the loss rate, we can actually win more of these deals. So we'll show you some systems and insights around how the loss rate can actually be the key to revenue growth. But back to my co-presenter today, Kyle. Kyle and I used to be neighbors in a small attic off the campus at BYU. But since then, Kyle, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I now live in Boston. I work at a company called HubSpot, which provides, among other things, a CRM solution. My role is to teach people how to use it. I create training videos and online courses that help people succeed at sales, whether they're using HubSpot or not. So kind of what I bring, I think, to this presentation is I'll show some solutions using HubSpot as an example, but I'll focus on principles. So if you're using some other CRM system, you should still be able to implement the things we're talking about.
Perfect. I mean, I can't tell you how happy I was. I've been using HubSpot for 10 years. And when I started to look at the documentation videos and the training certifications, I just saw my old neighbor. Since then, we've tried to stay in touch a little bit, and it's fun to be able to present with you, Kyle.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So again, I'm Kevin, and I am the founder of valueassessment.com. And win-loss rate is really important in the world of value assessment tools because it's really focused on the buyer experience. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But overall, what I hope we can take away from the presentation today are these three ideas. How can you succeed when you inherit any type of revenue ownership? Two, what are some systems we can put in place, and how can we train people to help us gather and maintain good data around our win-loss rates? And three, how do we actually use what we can learn from this data and other win-loss sources like good interviews to make good changes? How do we talk about those changes? How do we actually use this data as a catalyst for change that can lead to revenue growth? So we'll tackle those three ideas as we go through the presentation today. But one big challenge I have for you, no matter what your role is, if you're in revenue leadership, if you're an account executive, if you're just an executive trying to learn more about what win-loss is, take a chance to look at your role today as if it was new, as if you were inheriting it for the first time. And I was lucky enough to have an experience in the last year where I did just this. I inherited a new role as a VP of sales, and I got a chance to come into an established team that was already successful in a lot of respects, and I was able to dial it up. And that experience was a blast, and I hope we can all approach our job from the same lens. Don't keep everything old and the same just because that's the way it is. Approach it with the eyes of coming into the role for the first time. I bet you'll enjoy it. So as we look at these systems and these insights today, a way that we commonly think about growth as revenue leaders in the B2B space is through the lens of what I call the B2B Growth Pyramid. Now, you've probably never seen this before. This is something that we've published at valueassessment.com, but it presents a very simple equation for trying to plan for growth. And so at the top of the revenue, or growth pyramid rather, you have revenue. And if you want to grow revenue, it needs to come from one of two places: new business or existing business, new clients or existing clients. And for either of those channels, it really boils down to these three fundamental elements on the bottom here. Capacity. Do you have the capacity on your team to handle any changes in the revenue equation? Win rate, how efficient is your team at winning business? And deal quality, what kind of deals are you actually closing? And can you change any of those characteristics to grow revenue? And we'll come back and revisit this. In fact, the last thing we'll do in our presentation today is actually go through a little scenario, a little annual planning exercise a very brief, simplified version of one, and we'll come back and reference this pyramid. But I wanted to frame how we're thinking about revenue growth here today. And of course, it's win-loss week. So we're going to talk about win rate from new business specifically. And when we start thinking about win rate from new business, we start to think about, how we can measure that. And Kyle, I think I've prefaced this when we were preparing for the presentation, but I don't want to get too caught up in the equation for win rate. It's a fun debate, but instead I want to look at the systems we can use to gather the data that we'll use in that win rate equation. And that's really why I have Kyle on here. So Kyle, I'm going to hand this over to you. And maybe you could talk a little bit about systems from the perspective of a CRM or marketing automation platform like HubSpot.
For sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Are you seeing this deal pipeline here?
I am.
All right. So for those of you who are new to HubSpot, this is what deals, or you might know them as opportunities, are like in HubSpot. This is where you're going to track your sales. And regardless of what CRM system you have some method, hopefully, of tracking your sales in progress through whatever your sales process looks like. What you're seeing here are just kind of the default stages that come in HubSpot out of the box when you first set it up. And I've created one little deal here, and it's just this drag and drop interface. As the deal moves through your pipeline, you can move it from one stage to the next. Now, sort of what inherently happens in sales processes, just I think because of the way salespeople are incentivized, it's very exciting to move a deal to the closed won column. It's never exciting to move it to the closed loss column, right? For a sales rep, closed won is money, closed loss is crushing defeat and failure.
In fact, Kyle, that was a huge challenge coming into that VP of sales role last year for me. Everyone on the team was almost scared of moving the deal to the closed lost column. The pipeline was just filled with deals that should have been moved to the closed lost column a long time ago.
Yeah. And I mean, this is just, it makes sense, right? This is human nature. Even if anyone watching this has never been in sales, like the idea of giving up on someone who might conceivably pay you money is just, you can't countenance it in sales, right? If you're gonna survive the world of a salesperson, you've got to be that internal optimist, and that leads you to like hold on to things that you should have let go a long time ago. And so in HubSpot, when you move a deal to close lost, there is kind of some functionality here that asks you for a closed loss reason. And
this is pretty common in Salesforce and other CRMs.
Yeah, you'll see this a lot. And I, at least in this default setup, it's optional. And worst of all, it's a text field, which text fields are infinitely flexible, right? The salesperson can tell you their sob story about why this didn't work out. But as far as turning that into data that you can make decisions on, that you can coach your team based on, it's going to be nearly impossible, right? Because some salesperson is going to be like, well, close loss reason, I lost it because the guy is a jerk, right? And they'll save it, and then you're just going to have one deal there forever that has its close loss reason as guy was a jerk, right? And that is just not going to help you, right? Even sales reps that are trying to help, right, went to competitor, or that the likelihood that they will phrase it and spell it exactly the same and it'll be consistent enough that you can report on it is just very, very low.
So you have a myriad of different problems with that setup. Then you brought up really a data issue in that the data is not going to be consistent with the free text response. Then you also mentioned what I would call kind of a training or a people issue. Not knowing with the flexibility given to them for that free text field. How are they supposed to be consistent with their reasons to help us see patterns? And so, lots of problems with the data that's gathered in kind of a default setup, whether it's in HubSpot, Salesforce, Pipedrive, whatever you use. If you're just using a free text field to ask the rep, who is a biased party in this kind of win-loss analysis world, you're not really going to be gathering any useful data. You're going to go back and look at it, and ultimately what's going to happen, and I went through this, you're going to see a bunch of reasons, but you're not going to learn anything from that.
Yeah.
You're going to have to go back and interview the rep anyways.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
How can we make the data somewhat valuable in the
Yeah.
context of the CRM?
So a couple of options here. So in HubSpot, you can have more than one deal pipeline set up. And I've set up a couple of others. I called this one default pipeline because it's the default pipeline. One solution, Kevin and I discussed a few solutions. So kind of the two main ones we fell on here are required properties. This is the one I've recommended to lots of people. This deal pipeline, you can see I've used in demonstrations before. It's got a lot more deals in it. But here, if I grab a deal and move it to the close loss column, the experience is slightly different. So we still get this pop-up, but now we still have close loss reason. This is that same free text field, and it's still optional, right? If I, as a rep, want to add some color to it, if there's something I think is important, something I want to debrief with my manager on, whatever the case is, I can add those notes here, and I think that is valuable. But what I've done is this asterisk means this is a required property. I can't move the deal to close loss unless I select a close loss category.
Okay.
And these are just kind of generic ones I've arbitrarily selected here. You would want to base this on some sort of data, right? And you may need to refine these over time, dividing two options or combining, just depending on what you're getting. But basically, price went with competitor, bad timing. You could also have like no decision, whatever your thoughts are here. Now this, again, it's going to require your reps to actually move things to close loss and select an option. But now you're going to get something you could produce a pie chart with. You could produce a line graph showing like, are we losing to competitors more and more? Are we getting better in our competitive landscape? You start to get things that you can make those kind of macro decisions on, but also you can start comparing reps to each other, right? Why is this rep losing deals versus this rep? That may be a coaching opportunity, right? If you have none of your reps are losing on price except that one who just got hired last month, well, that rep needs some advice on how to navigate those pricing conversations.
Yeah.
And so
that's really
this
interesting.
Really
so you kind of got rid of well, you didn't get rid of it, but you helped the data quality problem by creating the drop down with the categories, maybe adding a little more color here. The team had some discussion, you have some methodology perhaps that you've already adopted, Challenger, whatever it is, right? And you decided that you are going to have these 4 or 5 categories, these 4 or 5 labels that you'll apply when a deal is lost. And as you said, from that, you can have a live report that's automatically updated anytime a deal is moved to close lost. It's not something you have to go and update every single time or try to extract from a bunch of free text field responses.
Right, exactly. So this is, like I said, this is the one I've recommended to a lot of people in the past. It's got all the advantages you just mentioned, Kevin. But for those who are watching, Kevin suggested an idea to me I had not thought of before. I've been playing around with it, and so that's this third option here, which I'm calling additional stages. And what we've done here in this pipeline, if you look, there are a lot more stages. There is not one called close loss, and here we are directly playing into the psychology of your sales reps, right? In the back end, if we pulled back the covers and looked at the settings of this pipeline, we would see that project delayed, radio silence, price concerns, bought from competitor, these are all close loss stages. In your deal reports, in your probabilities, in your forecasts, these are all considered lost. So they will not in any way gum up those metrics and things. But to the sales rep, what we are doing we're moving this deal into sort of a nurturing stage, right? And we could build automation on the back of each of these, right? When bought from competitor, maybe we're going to circle back in a year when their contract is likely to be up, or whatever the case may be, or radio silence, maybe we'll just put them into some sort of drip campaign. Whatever strategies your sales team, your marketing team decides works best, you can automate all that based on this. And now the sales reps never have to explicitly admit defeat, right? what they can do instead is say, this deal, I keep working on it, it's not moving forward. I want to hand it off to somebody else for a little bit till they're actually ready to talk to me. And that has a lot of advantage. That fosters a sort of collaborative mindset. It's probably, hopefully, going to keep your pipeline cleaner, because the sales reps now see this as something that is helping them.
Yeah,
And
you give them
so,
the right psychological incentive to do the thing you want them to do. I mean, this is
right.
exactly what you build out here is close to a mirror of what I went through. So I think, as I mentioned, in inheriting that VP of sales role, I had a super clogged pipe. Really hard to learn anything from the pipeline because there were tons of deals that just should not be there anymore. And we spent, weeks going through the deals, trying to learn something from them as we were moving them to closed lost. And just to make that process easier, instead of just throwing it into lost and forgetting about it, we at least tried to put them into different categories, and we kind of bootstrapped the pipeline to do that. But in experimenting with that cleaning process and building that second pipe, just like you did here in HubSpot, and kind of moving the deals through that through those categories, we said, well, hey, why don't we just keep this? And it started a really interesting conversation with our marketing team, because it actually gave the marketing team much more information
Sure. Yeah.
and send them through the rest of the life cycle again, right?
Yeah.
So, we kind of looked at each stage from the lens of ownership. Which role is owning which stage? And instead of a world where the sales rep moves it to closed lost and no one owns it anymore,
Right.
it's an oversimplification. We threw it into a stage where no, marketing owns all the closed lost stages, and here's why they were lost. So that's how you should talk to them.
Yeah.
It made a huge difference.
Yeah. And I love that mindset. I hear people say catchy things sometimes, like close one doesn't mean close done. But like
Right.
the same is true of close lost, right?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
It's certainly not where you want your reps focusing their effort, right? That's not their jobs. But to just let them go into a void where they're lost forever, or alternatively, not to move them to close lost at all and let them just sit in the pipeline and go stale,
Yeah.
is not good for anyone. And actually, on the point of if I go back to my pipeline that actually has quite a few deals in it. There are a couple things in HubSpot, I can't really speak as well to other CRM systems, that we've been doing to try to solve this problem of visibility. Like a rep looks at their pipeline and says, which of these should I be working on? And like we are talking about how some of them they shouldn't be working on, right? They got to get them out of there so they can see better where their real opportunities lie. And so just a couple of little things. I don't actually know how this will work, since this is all dummy data in a test portal.
Yeah, sure.
But we've created this inactive cards thing that you can
Oh, yeah.
say when a card has been inactive for a certain amount of weeks or whatever period of time, we're gonna gray them out, and this can help reps see like, oh really, I haven't done anything with this crazy good deal
Right.
in 10 weeks.
Right.
Okay, maybe in reality I should pass this back over to marketing, right? And they can, and this one that they have been working kind of sticks out more, like, yeah, that's the one I'm looking for. And so just little things like this, just even in the way a pipeline looks, can help sales reps improve the way they work on things.
Yep,
And
I know that exists in Pipedrive. In Salesforce, you have a ton of options for how you actually look at your pipeline.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you can customize it further there. But
infinitely customizable.
when HubSpot introduced this feature, it was the inactive highlight as well as the stoplight thing. They're just everything to make it easy to see what's on the card in one view.
Yeah. Yeah, so the stoplight thing Kevin mentioned is just a simple priority thing. I have that turned on right now. I've marked this one as a high priority. I've marked this one as medium. There's also low, but it looks like I don't have any marked as low right now. And so it just anything you can do to help your reps make sense of this data, right? Because hopefully this is not just something the sales team is doing to appease their overlords, right? Like this is something that's actually going to help them sell better. It's going to help them hit their quota. It's just going to be good for everyone, right? And it's also going to help them better manage and meet the needs of the people they're selling to.
And back to win rate, we had the challenge in the default pipeline setting. If you're still living in a default pipeline world, this is something you can change. You actually required a decent number of extra clicks from the rep, and there's already record keeping fatigue for sales reps. Like everyone knows this. But in this setup with this particular pipeline, or no, the other pipeline with the categories, closed lost instead of just closed lost. If you could go back there for just a quick
second. I think that actually is this one. If I just move one to close lost real quick.
Not the category drop down here.
Oh, your
closed
stages.
lost reasons, but not a closed lost stage, quote unquote. In the back end.
The one with the extra stages?
Yeah, the extra stages.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So again, these additional stages, technically for other record keeping purposes, their properties are set to closed lost. The probability is lost, but we've named them, instead of naming them closed lost, they're named after the reasons why they are lost. This actually reduces work for the rep.
Yeah.
They don't need to deal with that pop-up anymore.
True. Yeah, like they could just drag them to the appropriate one and be done. Right.
So that's the perfect kind of product hat scenario where it takes less work than the default pipeline setting for the rep, but it actually gives you better data.
Yeah, for sure.
So what can we do besides making the day-to-day record keeping part of the job easier? We're talking about this kind of crawl, walk, run concept. Crawl maybe is that is either one of these pipeline configurations where, hey, we're improving the quality of the data as we start to mature our win-loss analysis internally by managing different properties of our pipeline or our deal records. So that's maybe a crawl. As you look to something of a walk, what are some other things you can do from the perspective of a CRM to push this further along? Because in a full mature win-loss analysis program, you have a lot of things going on, a lot of different tasks to coordinate. Who's going to be responsible for interviewing people in this account once it is lost? When do you decide that this particular deal is eligible for win-loss analysis? What is your sampling method? It starts to become a pretty heavy program to what else can we do from the perspective of the CRM to make that easier?
Yeah, and again, I think in general I skew just in how can we make the rep experience better here, right? Because even in this environment here, where to your point, Kevin, we've removed some clicks, right, and we've removed the psychological scariness of declaring something is lost, right? But even here, we still need the sales reps to actually move the deal to the stage at some point. And if, in a best case scenario, they're really busy working lots of other deals, they may just forget and never get around to it. In the worst case scenario, they might not actually have any good deals and they want to hold on to the ones they have so nobody finds out they don't have any good deals. And I think a little bit of automation in the CRM can help foster some conversations between reps and their managers, which hopefully there's always like a coaching relationship there. I know that is not always the case, but ideally that's what we're going to want. We're going to want to see. And so Workflows is HubSpot's automation tool. What you're seeing here is pretty simple trigger-based automation. If one of these criteria is the case, we're going to take these actions down here. And I've just kind of arbitrarily chosen some numbers here. You should absolutely look into your CRM data and see what your average sales cycle length is, see on average how long deals stay in a particular stage, and then turn that into these kind of enrollment triggers, right? I've just said, if the deal was created more than 90 days ago, and I should have included is not closed, then it might be time to have a conversation, right? If the deal stage has not been updated in the last 7 days or whatever, right? Then maybe we need to have a conversation about it. And especially like if the close date is in the past, but the deal has not actually been closed, right? A month ago, they said, yeah, we're going to close at the end of July. And now here we are a month later and they haven't closed it yet. Something is clearly wrong there. Like at the very least, they need to update that projected close date.
Yep.
So these are like 3 really good indications that a deal has gone stale, that it is not actually getting worked anymore. Right. And so if any one of these is the case, we're just going to assign a task to the deal owner, say, hey, this is a stale deal. You should look into it. And I've just like chosen myself, Kyle Jepson, whoever that person is that would be coaching this rep, assign a task to them too, so a conversation can happen. And I hasten to say, this is not a tattletale workflow, right? We're not trying to get anyone in trouble here, but a lot of times reps hold on to deals because they are stuck, or at least at some point in the past felt stuck and just didn't know what that next step was.
Yep.
And And so even if you have,
or some big priority deal came through last
right,
week, we've been focusing on that, and just
yeah,
other deals in the pipe, it hit one of the
exactly.
measures.
That's the thing. Like, just knowing a deal has gone stale doesn't tell you anything about why.
Yeah.
Maybe it is money being left on the table, right? Maybe it is
Mhm.
a deal that, to your point, something higher priority came up, but somebody should be working this.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not. Maybe they're just holding on to it. Maybe they just forgot about it. And so this is just to highlight some of these things and create conversations, right? And I think it is great, to design your deal pipeline and the interface your reps are working in such a way that it should be easy in theory for them to keep their pipeline up to date.
Yeah.
But the reality is everybody needs some reminding and coaching through that process occasionally, right? Because
So we did something really similar. In addition to the category pipeline, the closed lost reasons pipeline instead of the closed lost stage pipeline, we also put a filter on that, which is very similar to what you have here in the workflow. But instead of assigning a task to someone so that they can see their task list of stale deals, we would actually use it to create the agenda for our deal reviews as a team
nice.
and individuals. And the agenda was simply based off different report filters in the pipeline view. So it's just, as I saw your logic here for this workflow to create this task, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. That's the same thing that we did to filter our view of the pipeline, so that when we, meet weekly or bi-weekly for whatever flavor of deal review we're having, we just go to that filter. And if there are no deals in the filter, no problem. If there's a couple deals to talk about, let's dig in.
Yeah, and I love that. I think the best case scenario for anything in sales regarding improving performance, but maybe especially when it comes to close loss kinds of things, is some sort of marriage between a technology, a CRM solution, and some sort of like meeting or just cultural norm to get people talking about. And I think a filtered list or a dashboard of some kind. I know the founder of HubSpot's sales team, when HubSpot was brand new, Mark Roberge, was the guy who started our sales team. He went on to write a book about it. But one of his famous dashboards was the "Don't Be On It" dashboard, right? And this was just a list of, this was for marketing qualified leads being sent to sales that had not been contacted within whatever agreed upon period, right? 24 hours or whatever. And if you go into the meeting, and if you're on the dashboard because you haven't contacted that lead, well, now we got to talk about what happened. And I think the same thing could be true with the deal pipe, or you could have a "Don't Be On It" dashboard. You could call it something nicer if you wanted, but just like, here are the deals that we suspect based on these criteria have gone stale. Why? Let's talk about it. And as you build this thing that is like, if I don't update this deal, then Wednesday night or whenever it is we have this meeting, I'm gonna have to stand up in front of the group and tell the story. That starts to now
big time.
right now your CRM is supporting your cultural, your coaching, the things your team are actually doing, right? You can't expect one or the other to do this on its own. You can stand up in a meeting and be like, hey, you got to update your data. But if your CRM is not set up in such a way that they actually know how, that's a problem. Or you can have the best CRM setup for your team possible, but if nobody's been trained on it, if there aren't any actual expectations to use it, there's always going to be a disconnect. And so I think some combination of those two things is always going to be the most powerful.
And you hit on the culture point very strong there. I think as you look at this, we've talked about crawl, simple changes to the pipeline, this walk stage. The walk stage really is about starting to think about behavior with the reps, and how can you actually change or incentivize behavior with the tools that you're using, like a CRM. And when it comes to approaching a lot of this, I'd really encourage you to make it a team activity. I know that I have a practice when I'm leading revenue teams of having kind of quarterly planning cadences. And in those quarterly planning cadences, one of the big things we would tackle in something like an offsite would be, okay, let's take the "Don't Be On It" dashboard, right, from the history at HubSpot with Mark. What do we need to change about the logic on this "Don't Be On It" dashboard? And it's a group effort to define what that logic is. That way later, when you actually show up on the dashboard, it wasn't just one meeting where Kevin stood up and said, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. No, this was a group defined thing.
Yeah.
We all understand why something's showing up on the don't be on it dashboard. But I like that. Good example with the workflow, Kyle.
Thanks. I think I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, but just kind of a couple additional thoughts on this crawl, walk, run. I really like the way we've sort of stumbled into defining these, the way you just laid out walk. I would encourage most people who are watching this to keep walking for a while. The run, there's all sorts of things you can automate. You can always put all sorts of triggers in place that make things happen, but automation it's just a force multiplier. It just accelerates you, right? And if you're not going in the right direction, acceleration is a bad thing, right? It's going to take you farther and farther from your goals, might accelerate into a brick wall or whatever. Whereas if you can, when you're walking, when you're having these meetings, if you're getting the buy-in from your team to say, no, like we want to do these things for these reasons, here's how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. Once you can get that working really well, then you can start saying like, okay, now how can we introduce some automation or whatever other tools to accelerate this, to amplify it. But you've got to get those processes, those like cultural considerations, those team dynamic pieces all defined and put in place. Because honestly, if your reps aren't bought into the idea of close loss deals being important somehow, win loss rate being a thing we care about, a metric that actually somehow reflects on my success as a salespeople, it's a metric I can actually address and move and improve over time, and that will be good for me and good for the customers I help. Like you got to get all that in place first, and then running will probably be something very custom and specific to your team, because you will have identified all the things that work just perfectly for you, and then you can look to how to make them go faster. But I think there's always a temptation. I showed a workflow, and I always feel a little hesitant to do that, because people be like, okay, I'm going to build that exact workflow. It's going to say 90 days, it's going to say 7 days, and like, no, that's not how any of this works.
Yeah, and we tweaked those, those filters and those workflows a bunch, week to week, perhaps.
Yeah.
Filtering, because we noticed a pattern in the deals that kept on showing up. It's like, oh, well, maybe that's the case we didn't consider. We need to change some of what's happening in this walk stage. But I think you showed all of the basic tools, and most CRMs, have something like this. The workflows start to be a little bit more special to HubSpot, because it's a workflow engine built very close to the HubSpot data structure. But being able to look at your pipeline, consider data quality, and removing work in terms of clicks from record keeping is a really good way to start crawling to collect better win rate data. Walking, you can start to do things where record keeping and maybe reporting as an agenda for a meeting or behavior, in reps and in working deals starts to meet. And then when we look at running, it's something we didn't touch on as much, but the same tools are used, reports and workflows. All of the logic there can be used to start to automate workflows around assigning interviews, perhaps, as you start to gather even more rich data around your win rate, your win-loss rate from the buyers themselves. And that's where I kind of want to take the conversation. It's actually a good segue from what you said, Kyle. How do reps understand why they're losing deals? Because that's not what they're focused on, right? They're focused on winning the deals.
Yeah.
And how do we start to look at things from a buyer's perspective? So I'll run through that here with a couple of stats. So there's lots of reports published on why deals are won or lost. So what I tried to do was go and aggregate those reports and try to find some averages. So these benchmarks, they're not perfect. They're my derivation from a collection of published reports online. But in general, I think it paints an interesting picture. So the average B2B firm, you're winning about 40% of your opportunities. Now, these aren't leads, right? These are deals that have reached the opportunity stage. They're qualified, right? An account executive is working with them deep into the evaluation. And you're going to win about 40% of those on average. 30% of the opportunities you might be losing to a competitor if you're in a competitive space. And 30% of the opportunities might be lost to what's called no decision. And if you're familiar with some of the work from CEB and Gartner, the Challenger methodology, you might be more familiar with what no decision is. But what I'd like you to think about that, or when I say no decision, I want you to think that that's a buyer problem. You're losing deals because the buyers aren't able to do what they need to get a deal across the line internally. It's not a seller problem. It's a buyer problem. So let's look at what a leading B2B firm might be experiencing. And as you're gathering your win-loss data, where do you fall? A leading firm might not have as much competition, or they might win more competitive deals, so they're not losing as many opportunities to competitors. So you see that drops down to about 10%. But you see that opportunities lost to no decision, that really stays the same, because no matter how good you are at competing with other vendors or alternatives, everyone's struggling with deals that are lost to no decision, or every buyer is facing the same hurdle when it comes to really any small business, mid-market, enterprise level deals. So I put together a scenario to really highlight the importance of this. I want you to think about this maybe from the lens of an annual planning session. This is your rep profile, right? An account executive might carry a quota of 750K. Average deal size might be 50K. We'll say they're in a leading firm, a 60% win rate. And that means that they need about 25 opportunities in the year to hit their target, because they'll close 60% of that, and that's that 750 figure. But here's the issue. There's a lot of pressure on the business. Wasn't a terribly successful year the year prior. So there's not going to be any approvals for additional headcount. You're not going to be hiring anybody. The marketing budget isn't going to be increasing, so you're not going to see deal flow necessarily increase. And at the same time, you're still expected to grow. You might not have the resources that you hoped for, but you're still being asked for a 5 to 10% growth rate. Well,
always, that never goes away.
It's never going to change, right?
Peanut gallery here, hopping in, that's always the expectation, no matter what you're up against.
Yep. So where do you look, right? And if you've been in this seat before, you're starting to think through some of your history. Maybe if you're an account executive watching, maybe this starts to give you a different perspective. But let's go back to that growth pyramid, right? So we could look at all of the different angles here, but I'll still try to focus on win rate for the sake of the conversation today. If we look at new revenue and we look at the win rate, that's really one of two places where we might be able to make some kind of change. Capacity is not going to change. You're not going to be hiring anybody else, but we could change things around win rate and deal quality. But those are both kind of big changes. They require investments, time from different people in the organization, marketing, sales, and honestly, some executive sponsorship to make changes that impact either win rate or deal quality. But let's talk about what that might look like, because it all kind of focuses around buyer experience. And I don't want to focus on tactics today, things you might change or what the changes might actually be. I put a couple of ideas on the right here that you can read through. And I'm happy to talk about those another time, but I want to focus more on how you actually have the conversation internally to justify pursuing some of these changes. And it all starts with why you're losing, right? Why are you losing deals? If you're losing 30% of your opportunities and they're not all going to competitors, then what's really happening there? And at that point, it becomes kind of simple. If you help your buyers fail less often, you're going to win more. So let's look at what the solution might be for this annual planning exercise. The objective for the year might end up being, win deals that you're usually losing to no decision. But there's a pretty big journey to get there. You're going to have to start by looking at your buying group. Who is actually participating in the deal on the buyer's side? We've all seen numbers about buying groups growing. 7 people isn't uncommon anymore. Depending upon who you're selling to, they have to bring in colleagues and peers from different departments to approve something. It depends on your deal size. I put the rep profile here in this exercise so that you have some assumptions here as you think through the solution. But you might be in a much different category with much smaller deals or much larger deals. But in either case, you're still going to be facing the buyer group, just at different stages in the funnel and with different levels of interaction with different members of the buying group. But the first thing you have to do to start looking at improving the buyer experience and winning deals back from the loss rate is look at the buying group, understand who's there. Then you have to understand what they need. And this is what I call a questions to answer analysis. This is something I've done with a bunch of different software companies and others that really helps you dig into why the buying group is so big and what are the questions that each member of the buying group has, and when do you start to address those questions in your sales process. Sometimes it needs to happen at the top of the funnel, and you're really going to have to partner with marketing to cover some of these questions early before they get to the conversation with sales. Other times, you don't want to bring those questions up until you're closer to maybe your proof of concept, if you do some type of pilot. But that's when you really want to hammer a question hard that might usually come from the IT team, for example, about performance. But this Q2A analysis, it involves, it's very similar to a regular win-loss interview program. But in addition to talking through why a particular project fails in a traditional win-loss interview, you start to develop a battery of questions that go closer to, what were the questions you had in general for every vendor when it came to this project, and start to develop a profile again of not just the buying group, but what those common questions are. And I've already started to touch on this, but you partner with marketing to fill the gaps throughout the sales process by creating collateral or holding events on different questions to appeal to different buying groups. And there's some best practices there that I'm not going into because, man, it's really easy to focus too much on some of these questions in your sales process, and it actually creates a bigger divide in your group. But going back to the growth pyramid for just a second, we looked at win rate and deal quality. So you're going to learn a couple of things as you go through this exercise. You're going to start to see that, hey, we're actually losing deals to no decision because this particular stakeholder, this member of the buying group, always has this question and it always derails the conversation. And we're not doing a good job of addressing it. Or you might find out that, our pricing and packaging is actually creating way too much friction in the buying process. And you might need to approach the executive team and say, hey, I think we could win 10% more deals if we simplify our pricing, because we have, gone through this exercise, talked to these members of the buying group and asked them specifically about this. And they said that they went with an alternative, or more importantly, they couldn't get their team on board, even though you were the best solution. They just couldn't justify paying for it in this way. And man, that means they should be a customer, right? You've got to have some flexibility to adapt to that. And that's a big decision, and I'm not going to get into the nuances there. But after you go through this exercise, and this is not something that happens in a week or 2 weeks, this is a quarter by quarter exercise. How do you build this question and answer process back into your sales process? How do you fully respect questions from the buying group so that you're not missing reasons as to why they might not be able to make a decision together? So that hopefully gives you a ton of food for thought. Hopefully it gives you a lot of ways you can start conversations internally about improving the data that you're gathering for your win-loss rate, but also, how do we approach actually winning more by taking a closer look at why we're losing. And Kyle, thank you so much for joining us to actually show us live some examples of how we might change the tools that we're using to help us win more deals.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is a blast. If anyone's interested in connecting, Kevin and I both hang out on LinkedIn, I think. So reach on out. We'd love to talk about this more with anyone who's interested.
Absolutely. Awesome. Enjoy Win-Loss Week, everybody. Thank you.